So are you going live somewhere? Because I can share it.
Yeah.
Okay. If you can Facebook me the link that whatever we need, I'll tweet it and I'll Facebook it.
Cool. It's should have already started.
Okay, I see the Facebook Live.
Oh, so there it is. So it went already. So that's easy enough. I know it's kind of late on my end, but hey.
Yep. Found it.
Oh, you found it already?
I
Very
found
good.
the Facebook Live. If you're on YouTube, though, I'll share that one.
Yeah, of course I'm on there. I feel like
Okay.
who's not? Like, of
I
all
mean,
of
of
them, I feel like
course.
YouTube. I don't know. YouTube is still the best one for me. Like, if you want to learn how to fix anything in your house, which I'm experiencing these days, YouTube.
Oh, no kidding, man. I just had a garage spring break incident where my garage springs just broke. I didn't even know that was a thing. But yeah, my garage door wouldn't work, and so I had to Google how to replace garage springs. Now, granted, I did not replace the garage springs because I work for Samsung, not something else.
Oh
but
well.
but somebody else came and did it, and I knew exactly what the issue was, so they were able to do it the correct way. But our home warranty people.
Oh well. DIY, like a do-it-yourself solution. There's all sorts of stuff I figure on there. But anyway, okay. So
Yeah.
the very first one, I don't know if you've. And again, I think you had time to look it up,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. I have.
Moderation Nightmares. So, like, okay, let me give you the premise and then see how you feel about this. Oh, hello, Elaine. I like how unfortunately you can't see it, but it'd be nice if I could have you be able to chat with it. But I see you, Elaine. And so okay, so like the first one is really messed up. So I know like this happens all over at Silicon Valley, but the bottom line is, okay, so think about all the people that you know. Like I know one person in particular, I won't name them, but like people you know that keeps getting, let's say, warnings on social media like Facebook or Twitter because let's say they post something and it's false or there's just something wrong altogether. And what's really interesting is, let's say if you post up a video that has, like I saw one of a guy that I guess was climbing an extremely high height, and he ended up trying to jump from one platform to another, missed it, and fell literally to his death. And I'm like, okay, first off, I didn't necessarily want to see that. That's pretty disturbing.
Wow.
But that type of stuff goes online all the time. And so there's actual human beings, and I know specifically in Phoenix, Arizona, Facebook has a center that's there that employs these people that literally have to sift through when something gets flagged. So let's say if I flag that video, right, that means another human being is going to have to watch that video and determine if it's appropriate or not. And this is the kicker. They have to typically watch it, I'm going to say roughly about 15 seconds or so, to know that A is definitely not of of online etiquette, like it shouldn't be up on some sort of public place. And so the reason why they want them to watch it for a bit is to make sure no modifications has happened because like things get resent over and over, and sometimes things may be edited and modified so that you don't have that disturbing content that's up there. So even if they see the same, let's say that video, and then they came across it, let's say 3 days again later, they still have to watch that video for several seconds on end. But the point is, they have to do it because they have to validate that it is just inappropriate to be online to begin with. And it's just super disturbing that a human being has to deal with that. And they don't really get any sort of, therapy. Their breaks, like their working conditions, were pretty harsh. So to give you a little bit more insight, and I should, after this thing ends, I'll have to post some of the links so people can read it for themselves. But it's like they don't even have their own desk, right? They're all sharing desks, which means you show up when you show up and you take what's available. So there's no making yourself comfortable. People apparently leave trash. They found like boogers and stuff like that on these desks. Really like just terrible workplaces. But I think the kicker is they have a typical lunch break and they have like two 15-minute breaks, but then they have this therapy break that's like 9 minutes where they would see a therapist on the spot to kind of help them cope with what they're viewing that's being flagged. And so to open it up here, just kind of get your thoughts, like do people, like, do you even think about when you watch a video and you see something like
No.
that? Like I don't think about it. What's up? What's going on, Robert? I
Not
see you.
not at all. And I think that's even an interesting topic that you could talk about for a long time about just the things that we don't know that are happening behind the scenes when social media is involved. Specifically with these places, these facilities that you're referring to, when you ask the requirement of a job, if you ask somebody, hey, can you watch really disturbing videos all day long? Can you make sure that they're appropriate or they're inappropriate, flag them as such, and send them on their way? Think about the type of person you would be looking for that kind of job, right? So you're not looking for somebody who would also be found sitting at Facebook's office in California, right? Probably not the same caliber of employee, probably not the same sort of walk of life. There's a certain requirement to be able to do those things, and when you look at the conditions that were mentioned in that article, it's a facility that's created out of the environment that it exists in, and just some of the conditions that the employees and the workers had to deal with, as well as the actual requirements of the job. I see a video like that, and you started talking about the video of the guy walking on a tall, like I'll see a guy climbing a radio tower for his job, and I'll get sweaty palms just watching that, like that just gives me the heebie-jeebies. I can't imagine accidentally stumbling on something like what you referenced, and I'm sure it happens every single day. And I know I do see some videos that have been filtered to say that they're not appropriate, or they may have some adult subject matter or something like that, and I immediately scroll through those. But there's always that wondering in the back of my head, like, what are they trying to keep from us? What are they trying to keep me from seeing? And I've only had to watch one or two of those videos to know that I don't want any part of those videos. So it's an unspoken sort of background effect of social media that I'm sure many people just disregard, and then even complain about when they say, "Oh, well, why was my video flagged?" or "Why was this taken down?" Without considering the fact that there are actual human beings, real people with real life consequences in these facilities that are just not even regarded as part of this equation.
Oh man, absolutely. I mean, like Elaine just posted, she's like, they should get treatment available like 9/11 operators. And I would agree, huh? She just wrote another one. She said, I used to work in the courts, and even reading about crimes in black and white was disturbing. Right, and I would agree with that. And I think a lot of us who are on social media, like, we don't think about the things that we reshare, or, I don't think, like, I don't want to, like, normalize this, but, like, normal people, right? Like, we wouldn't post anything that seems to be very chaotic or would be disturbing to others. But some people don't think that way, and they just reshare it thinking it's kind of funny or whatever goes to their mind. And the thing is, somebody in the back end, and this is what I never thought about before, they have to deal with that. And it's not typically just once, like they're doing it over and over, because these things continuously, like, you take them down, at this one particular one that was flagged, but then it shows up elsewhere. So you even have to see the same ones over and over. And again, like I said, the Facebook requires them to view roughly like 15 seconds or so of it, just to begin with, like, just flat out. Even if you've seen it before, you still got to vet it. And I know, like, they specifically want to try to tell you, like, when it gets flagged and they take it down, they want to give you a timeline, perhaps, where something went south, where it just doesn't fit in their terms and conditions. And man, like, that's just something I never quite thought about before. And I think now moving forward, it's like, I can't imagine, especially, like, okay, we're Facebook Live now, and I could be, well, I don't want to use myself in this, but like some crazy person could turn around and decide to do something very drastic, just record it live and send it out, and it spreads like wildfire online.
Yeah, and
So,
and we saw that happen before. I don't know if anybody it was a horrible incident, but there was it was involving the news reporter and her estranged fiance or something that got involved, and he Facebook Lived and actually went and attacked her on Facebook Live, and ended up actually killing her and one other person. And that was something that was never done before. It was something it was huge. It was back in 2015 or 2016, I want to say. And so we have seen those types of things happen before, and it's like at some point the lesson has to be learned that social media it's a fun place to be. It's great to do things like this, but there needs to be a level of respect for just how horrible you can really expose yourself to, just how much content can be out there that's just not, it doesn't have any place on this kind of platform. And I think another point that comes from this, and it's sort of it's a disappointing thing to realize. And Terrence, I know you're involved with some folks at Facebook, so this you might be able to speak to this a little bit too. Mark Zuckerberg is a guy that I think represents that new age millennial that really wants to change the world with challenging the status quo and making sure that some of those de facto things that made people successful in business back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s doesn't apply to a Harvard dropout who literally invented Facebook. And so millennials kind of champion that hero, and then they always say, don't meet your heroes. And you see some of the things that he does in public, and it's like, this is a guy who wants to change the world for the better. But then you see some of this stuff, and it's like, this is your business. This is the stuff that's happening on your watch. And as much as you want to give him credit for all the good things and then also sort of pass off the buck on some of the really bad things, I think that there needs to be some acknowledgement on, this is not the first time this has happened. Facebook has had these incidents in the past with facilities that are outside of this area, of really just this very specific niche of what the job requirements are, where it sort of creates that environment.
Oh, straight up. And it, not only that, but wait a minute, we're going to trust a guy that hid his webcam for a bit, right, because of privacy issues, but wants to put a Facebook camera system inside your house. Yeah, Mark, good move. Just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, it's
what's up, Joseph?
It's a little disappointing just because of the fact that, like I said, and somebody like me, I really. I want Mark Zuckerberg to be that champion to change the world, to change the face of communication. But then we see things like even what happened in the Supreme Court, or I'm sorry, not the Supreme Court, but in the when he testified in front of the Judiciary Committee regarding the 2016 election. There were some things that were said and some points that were raised that Facebook was indefensible, in the way that they handled it. And how can you at one point claim that this is so important that we go on this really positive pact and this positive trend, but at the same time you make these decisions that are very clearly motivated by some form of selfishness or some form of individual gain as opposed to gain for the public that you so publicly defend.
Yeah, it's like I don't want to take this one, or I guess I will take this one from Tim Cook. It's like, a lot of people want to claim get credit without taking responsibility. And I think this is the main issue right now, in particular with Facebook in general, is they want to behave as if they don't have this power, right? Like, we don't want to touch this. We want to leave it as it is. They don't want the responsibility for it. And it's like, well, when you do have tools like this, you have to have responsibility for it. And to Elaine's point, right, there was a mass shooter that was live on Facebook. This did happen before. Yeah. And notice what they did, right? They tried to quickly take it down. And to their credit, I will say that, look, you can't stop everything. You can only do your best with it. And I would say it's worth, unfortunately, it's best to have these tools available, and sometimes unfortunate things happen than maybe the other way where you couldn't do things live. So, I do take that with a grain of salt. However, again, the responsibility of these companies, they have to be more. They have to hold themselves accountable, hold people accountable, right? I get it that a lot of people like the fact that they could be anonymous and this sort of thing, and I totally understand that. But when it comes to, if you're going to do things live and you're going to have that impact from a social perspective, I don't know where you lean on this, but personally, I feel like anonymity doesn't belong on places like this where you can do things live. I know that's a little dicey for some people.
Absolutely not.
But I'm like, it's one thing, let's say a forum or something like that, where let's say if I'm on a car forum, which I am, let's say, I'm in the Evo forums. I can be whoever I want to be. Cool. I'm just in that community. They can boot me out, whatever. And, we can go about our business. But the problem with Facebook is it's so broad reaching. We've seen what it's done from an election standpoint. We can't deny that. It's very clear. And it is so personable, and it can be so helpful, but it can be so destructive.
Yeah, and I completely agree. The condition of anonymity or the condition of hiding behind a keyboard, I think, is it's a dangerous reality for a lot of people because it has become more a part of the political discussion. I think we will touch a little bit on this on our third topic, so I don't want to get too far in the weeds. But you can't stand up in the middle of a Wendy's and scream the F word 150 times without getting arrested for disturbing the peace, right?
Yeah,
So
period.
why you think you can do the same thing on a public forum like Facebook and have no consequences? To be honest, you can sit there on your own personal statuses because you can choose who gets to see it. But the minute you get into a public forum or a public discussion and you start saying the most horrible, just awful things you can think of, you should be censored. You
Or
should
held
absolutely be
accountable.
censored or held accountable. I'm personally okay with Facebook saying this is not something that you should be talking about. So we're going to keep you from talking about it, because just like the police do in real life, and just like, protecting the public from these sort of ideas, I think it's important that they do that. I think it's important that Facebook moderates that. Now, at the same time, and sort of to go full circle, I also think it's important for Facebook to take responsibility for the fact that they are putting their own employees and their own people in a place where they're exposed to the worst of the worst that they're trying to protect the public from. So at the same time, being cognizant of that, they need to be putting a lot of science into those facilities. They need to be putting a lot of mental health science into those facilities. We need to make sure that not only is the actual environment, the physical environment, one that's okay to exist in, but the spiritual environment, the physiological, metaphysical, everything about that environment needs to be researched, and because clearly there's a lot of problems with it. When you have people literally dying on the job because they're seeing the most horrible things that the public can be subject to, there's an issue, or there's something that needs to be respected as far as content can go.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to really understand the balance.
Yeah, it's like I was listening to one of the employees there, which, by the way, just so you know, so everyone gets a general idea, they're making a little over 28,000 a year as their salary, right? Which I'm like, I'm sorry, that is not going to fly to pay. I mean, I guess like if you're in a tight situation, people are going to do what they have to do. But I mean, is it worth that money? Absolutely not. Not to me for my mental health. And then to your point again, I can barely read people's political posts, right? Their political posts
Yeah.
without sometimes my emotions going like a roller coaster. So I can imagine like one of them saw like a babysitter like hitting a kid until like a baby into the nose bled, right? And another one choked a toddler. I'm like, this is crazy. Like, there's no way. For me personally, I can't watch that. Not only
Yeah.
would it be disturbing for my own well-being, but I just don't think I'd recover from that. That's just not something I could be subjected to and come out unscathed. I would say for me, there's no amount of money that you could subject me to that would be okay. So I'm trying to think from that human being standpoint that has to do it, because someone has to do it, right? Like you could
Right.
try to make algorithms that capture this stuff, but we know people have gotten really good at fooling it, and then the technology is just not quite there yet. So like what's the right move? Do we subject people and pay them to look at it and moderate it? Or, do we just let it run free and rampant? Or option C, do we try to use algorithms and hope we catch it and hope we slow it down?
Yeah, I mean, and the funny thing is, I think maybe 10 years ago, I would have a different opinion about what I could and couldn't stomach on the internet as far as content goes. As I get older, I kind of start to appreciate a little bit that this is not something I want to subject myself to. But I have a younger brother who probably, he's 23 years old. He could probably do that job and be completely part of his normal everyday life, just because that's some of the stuff that he chooses to engage in on the internet. So I think there are people out there who see the value monetarily. To your point, 28,000. I mean, you could do that you can't make that at Wendy's, so
No.
do that, take a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday job. Who knows? Maybe there is some value in some people, but I think understanding that decision is not made in a vacuum, and that there needs to be some real ownership from the company that's making the employee do that or engage in that activity, is part of the equation, and providing them with that mental health, and that overall reaching blanket of security that says, this is a tough job. We appreciate it's a tough job. We're not just using you for a pawn until you literally lose your mind and then just swap you out for somebody else.
Yeah, and look so Derek wrote here. I don't know if you can see it, Jeremy, on your end.
I can. Yeah, I can.
Okay, cool. Like, accountability has been something that we have not been exercising at all. My opinion, and don't you say sorry, Derek, this is all opinion, so please, by all means, share them here. And I agree. I mean, accountability, everybody wants to escape from it. Nobody wants to be held accountable for anything, which is kind of like America's theme right now, right? We want to reap all the rewards without me going too far there, but at
Yeah,
the
you
same
almost
time,
did.
nobody wants to
Yeah,
take
that's true.
responsibility. Heaven
Yeah.
forbid. So it's a really tight situation. And so now, we can go ahead and switch topics for a little bit. So I know you found one that's definitely a hot item right now. So Jeremy, what's a topic that you found that you'd like to discuss today?
My favorite thing I've seen on the internet so far today, and this is just my favorite thing to talk about because I think it's so important to talk about these kinds of things, but it's also so important that we really appreciate just how far gone we are from really having an intelligent discussion about things. This Betsy Ross Nike flag. Um, Look, Nike is doing okay. Nike's going to be doing okay no matter what they decide to do. They have made some very calculated risks, specifically involving Colin Kaepernick, the former quarterback for the 49ers. They know what they're doing. They know what target audience they're reaching out to. And I don't think they're too upset with the fact that, once again, this is Nike boycott version 3.0 from a specific side of the political discussion. But for those of you who are not full up to speed on this, Nike released a American flag edition of their Fourth of July shoe, and on the back of this shoe is not the current American flag, but in fact the Betsy Ross 13 star American flag. Colin Kaepernick, who is partnered with Nike on currently on many campaigns, probably their most successful or most popular campaign to this point this year, as far as discussion goes, reached out to Nike's executives and said he didn't feel comfortable with that shoe being on the market because it embraces a history, a piece of America's history when slavery was, sort of still public or still present, and he thinks that people of color would find it offensive, and he finds it offensive. So Nike immediately took the shoe off the market and inspired a ton of backlash from conservatives who think that they, and others who think that they once again bowed down to the snowflake generation, the triggered, movement, whatever you want to call it. And I would love to get your thoughts on this, Terrence.
Ooh, yeah, okay. I definitely have some thoughts coming from a person that identifies as black and white, but nonetheless. So I took a look at it, and I have to say, like, I don't know. I agree with Kaepernick, and mind you, look, just full disclosure here, guys. I'm just gonna say it how I feel it. Look, call us a snowflake general, whatever you want, but I'll call others the generation that can't move on, right? Like, first off, there's only one flag. There's an American flag. Full stop. I don't care of like the Confederate flag. Like, that's another one. Don't like it. I live in Georgia. We have Stone Mountain. Now, here's another controversial part. So, do I think that we should remove from Stone Mountain or this sort of thing? Well, no, you can't go and correct and wash away history, right? Like, what has happened has certainly happened. I think my main issue is that we celebrate that. Does that make sense? So, in other words, like,
Absolutely.
we have very Confederate things here in the South of which I live, and I acknowledge that it's there. I see General Lee. I get you. I understand why it was there. What I don't understand is why we cling to it, why we hold to it, right? And it's supposed to be the United States. It's a different time. Clearly, we expanded since the 13 colonies. Why are we not embracing for what we stand for today? Because we have evolved as a country. And so when I look at things like that, the Confederate flag and the rest of it, and I know there's a lot of conservatives, not all of them, but a lot of them that like to hold on to it, I just look at that and say, but why? Like, what are you clinging on to? Like, have you not heard, like, change and adapt, right? Or you die. I mean, major countries have risen and fallen. Whether you look at the great Roman Empire, you can go throughout all history. And one of the biggest trip falls is when they decide that they can't grow, that they can't adapt. So I get, like, again, that's history, but why you want to revive it and go back there, to me, is just beyond me. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot more to it that's much deeper in everybody's mind, every individual person that clings to it. I think there could be associative ignorance to the fact that it does affect other people who maybe they don't identify the same things. I'm proud to acknowledge the fact that, Terrence, you see things on a regular basis that I will never experience, because that's the beauty of America. There's so many different varieties and so many different people who are walking around and living life here that that's possible and that that should be celebrated. I think the part where we lose that is when we ignore the fact that, hey, you might see something and feel a different way about it than I do, and that's okay. But when you start to co-opt these sort of opinions and start to associate them with a political, a giant political agenda of any kind, I think that's when we start to lose sight of what's important. I think that there's a contingency of what you might call the liberals who have totally co-opted this offensiveness to the Betsy Ross flag, who are now going to look at the Betsy Ross flag and think, oh, what a horrible, horrible thing, when before they didn't really feel that way. They didn't. Now, part of it could be just education. Now that they know sort of what's associated with it. For me personally, I never have really thought about it that way. But
fair.
I also don't get to think about it that way. Like, does that make sense? Like, I wouldn't see that and feel that way. But now that somebody, like a person of color, now has come out, and people of color have come out and said, like, hey, that's offensive to us. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. My bad. I'm not a big fan of that flag anymore either. I think we should keep it at a distance. We could respect it for what it is, which is a part of our history. But at the same time, we don't need to put it on a shoe. Like we don't need to put it out in the public views to the point where we can, where it creates so much of this negative discussion too.
Oh, for sure.
It's going back to the same discussion about the Confederate flag. I'll never understand why we have to be so dedicated to the American flag in general. Now, full disclosure, I am a Canadian citizen by birth. So, but I have lived in America most of my life. And so I do appreciate my American citizenship as well. But I'll never understand that level of forced patriotism that comes from that love for the flag. I appreciate our troops more than anything. What they have done and what our soldiers overseas over the past century have done for us is immeasurable to how much we get as a country. And I will always forever be indebted to them and to every future generation of soldier. The flag represents a lot of that, but it also doesn't, because people still put it on a bathing suit, and people still, sort of cut it into a square and put it on the back of their phone, and they think it's this forced patriotism. I'll never understand that in general. Being able to then say, there's 4 of these flags that I have to identify this way, because at some point, like, America's not that old of a country.
True.
When you look at the rest of the world, we're still pretty young. So the fact that we're now going like, oh yeah, there's 5 flags we need to appreciate because that's part of our history. I don't think any country in the world sees that same level of forced patriotism.
Yeah, it's so many interesting things you brought up. So first, let's start with Derek. I like what he just wrote. He's put, I understand remembering history, but is history that important that we seem to not pay attention to what is happening today and preparing our children for tomorrow?
Derek.
Which, yeah, I'd agree with that. And then also, I think you kind of touched on something today, and I think you use the appropriate term, right? Which is like forced patriotism. And I know, like, this is my thing with it. Okay, the American flag is awesome. Like, I get what it's for, and there's a more of an idealism for what it stands for, right? And look, I look at patriotism not as just wearing a flag, because I'm like, anyone can do that. To me, that's not patriotism. If you want to do something patriotism, serve your country one way or another. Whether you serve in the military, whether you serve your local community, or you get involved in politics and you serve constituents, something of that nature. But to just say, hey, I'm going to wear this flag, totally cool. And then to your point too, like, yeah, when there's, okay, here's another touchy one, but I'm going to go there.
Go there.
So you'll see people, right? They get upset
Tomorrow.
at our generation, right? Because like recently was Pride, right? You had Pride in San Francisco, everything else. And my wife pointed out something that was so good, I'll never unhear it, right? And it's like people all just say all the time, well, okay, these gay people, Pride people, like, why do they flaunt it around, these flags and everything else? And at the same time, I'm like we flaunt the American flag around, right? I guess everybody's proud to be with something. So I don't know. I think people just get way too crazy, way too bent out of shape about it. And I just don't get it. I don't get it.
And to your point, flags do represent things. They have a symbolism, a meaning behind it. And the pride flag is so important to this current movement, to this current status of understanding LGBTQ rights in America. the American flag has a certain semblance to it and a certain sense of pride, and red is the blood, white is the spirit, all of that I think is so important. But what does that mean when you put your Confederate flag on the back of your truck? You know what I mean? Like, what does that represent? If it's not the same thing, like, you could use the same flag that we all know and love, but you chose to use a different one. And if you're telling me it's not about symbolism there because you just like the way that it looks, or because it's part of our history, well, it is part of our history, but that doesn't mean that you should probably be celebrating that. Number
Yeah.
one, the South didn't win. The things that they wanted didn't happen because we as a country knew better, because we made the right decision. We knew, and there was a much larger contingency of people in the North who supported the ideals that slavery is not okay, and that civil rights is something that we should at one point get to as a country. And it took a long damn time, and we're still kind of seeing it today. But we knew better, and we made the right decision then. Why are you celebrating making the wrong decision 150 years later?
I don't get it. And even like Derek brought up a good point. So this is just from his point of view. I'm a veteran and I'm speechless on what people have
Thank
to
you for your
say
service,
about.
Derek.
Agreed. So he said, I'm a veteran and I'm speechless on what people have said about what the flag is supposed to mean. I see it differently when I look at it, but I truly can't say my patron comes from our flag. No, it comes from, you just want to serve people. Dude, like, I love the idea, like, land of the free, where people have like freedom of religion, freedom to choose who they love, all these different things. And mind you, look, I live in the South where we say these things, but we have a very religious aura about us here in the South, which
Good old
doesn't
Bible
necessarily.
Belt.
Yeah, I live in the Bible Belt. I see it every day. And it's really unfortunate. It would be nice if people can step back and say, look, like, there are plenty of men and women who died, to get us to where we are today. And mind you, remember, this goes both ways, right? Like, know the history. We escaped the British, right? Because we wanted, representation when we do get taxed. And we also took a lot of Native Americans out of their own homes, right? Like, we kind of booted them. Trail of Tears is also not far from where I live. And we're going through like this whole immigration thing, which we'll save that for another podcast. But it's like this crazy type of tribalism that brings us full circle. And it's just, whatever happened to just do right by your people in the community and the ideals in which we serve, which is supposed to be the United States. Like, whatever happened to that? I don't care if you're black, white, Hispanic, if you came from another country and decided to live here. Like, I think that's awesome. I want to embrace it, not try to separate it. And so, back to the main point, when I see these things being rehashed from the past, it brings up those separations. It brings up that negative part of history. And again, I'm not saying that we don't acknowledge it, but at the same time, I'm saying, why are we celebrating it? Like, that just, I mean,
Yeah.
would it be cool if somebody goes around with, like, a Nazi flag on a shoe or whatnot? And I get it, like, those are separate things, but at the same time,
It's tough. Yeah, it's tough not to draw that parallel. I completely agree. I know it's a dangerous subject to try and compare anything close to what happened in Germany in the 30s and 40s, but it's sort of the same thing. Like, that's such a sordid history in the entire world that we don't even talk about it. We don't even acknowledge it. Can we at least agree that slavery was not something that we should really celebrate and we should talk about, and we should treat it in some way similar to where we can say, like, we understand that it happened. The only reason we acknowledge it and we appreciate it is so that we don't do it again, and so that we don't make that same mistake twice. And it's funny, you brought up the Trail of Tears, and it's a whole other part of our history that doesn't get a lot of attention. But I mentioned I'm from Canada, and a lot of people don't know this, but in Canada there was a very similar contingency of people who supported internment camps and sort of these small communities for Native Canadians, for the early settlers, that they treat them pretty horribly. And that history is something that Canadians learn about getting through school and going through to adulthood. And it's not something that gets celebrated. Politicians, usually one of their first things they do when they get elected into an office, or when they are nominated into an office, is that they make apologies, they make amends, and they say, this is not something that we ever should have done, and so we apologize to your communities. They let them live that separate life without having to worry about it. Native Canadians exist with current everyday Canadians in the same society, doing different things, doing things that they like and they love. And there's not that same, level of just the controversy for just that one thing. Like, all we're asking is that people can live in the same communities in harmony without having to defend the fact that they're, offended by something that brings up these horrible things that they run into. And yes, there is racism in Canada. I don't want to say that racism is outside of Canada, but it's definitely, if you have somebody stand up and say some of the things about the Confederate flag, some of the things that we have, like this Betsy Ross thing, if there was any sort of symbolism that represented early Canadian settlers putting these Native Canadians into these communities, and that came up in a conversation, most of Canada would stand up and say, "Are you crazy? This is not a good idea. You're going to lose more. There's going to be more of a boycott coming from the fact that you even thought this was ever a good idea versus having to defend it and take it down." That's one part of this that I just, why is Nike getting boycotted for the reaction to this and not the thought that this was ever okay, or not even asking the people in their circles, hey, should we do this or should we not?
Oh man, absolutely. And by the way, like my dad just posted up. So Larry Van, he said some people have a problem with admitting the truth. It would be easier to move forward if we truthfully address the past. And for me, like I would agree with that. It's one of those like it's just like if you went to an Alcoholic Anonymous class, right? Like what's always the first step? Admitting that there was a problem. Yeah, and that's okay because it's not like we today, like as the human beings that sits around us, those of us who are alive have no impact of what somebody's done in the past. But we also can't pretend that it didn't happen, that it didn't hurt a lot of people, and that it didn't change our trajectory as a nation, right? And by the way, like I'll concede here, like I'm kind of going off topic, but I'll bring it back. So like a lot of people say, again, we mentioned this where people are like, oh, your generation's so sensitive. And right now there does seem to be a lot of that, right? Like you had the hashtag Me Too movement for good reasoning, right? But now, like, you can't even have, like, for instance, today I read that Terry Crews mentioned, like, that movie White Chicks 2 is coming out. Yes. And, like, White Chicks is such a good movie. I thought it was such a good movie. But anyway, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, though, like, things that they did in that movie, right? Like, the first one.
That's giving me the
could
sweaty
you
palms
do it?
just thinking about
Yeah,
it.
could you do it now? Because it was so funny. Like even one of the first scenes, like when they go approach the two ladies, right? Like the Wayans brothers, and they're like, "No, we already donated to the United Negro Fund," right? And it's like so many funny things then. And if you almost try to do it now, people almost just lost their poo emoji. And to some point, like it's just gotta stop, right? Like, look. We're all human beings. We're trying to make our way. Some people feel differently. I do feel separately like comedy is a bit off of, I want to say like off the record, like comedy shouldn't have the same bounds for obvious reasons. That's what they do. But to bring it back full circle there, like I get where some people think that some people are being a little too sensitive, and I understand that, but I think you just got to see it through both points of view. Again, what is the purpose of having
and that's the missing piece. That right there, that's the missing piece. If you refuse to see it from both sides, then you're just going to see it the one side that you think is loudest, right?
Yeah.
And if you identify with one, again, this has been co-opted into such a political discussion. We can't have a political debate or discussion around, who's the future leader of the country or who's going to be elected into this office next without first talking about who's going to defend the rights of African Americans when they get pulled over by police officers, and who's going to stand up and say this is okay or this is not okay. And there was a great moment in the debate with the Democratic candidates. Again, we can talk about it at a much different discussion. But there was a great moment when, people acknowledge that it's still an issue. It's still something that's happening that they just haven't been able to get corrected. And, until that stops, until that discussion doesn't have to be had anymore, people are going to take these ideas, these opinions, and they're going to butt them together in a political debate. And most people are going to embrace every piece of it and not remember the fact that, hey, you don't have to be all in on that. You can take a step back. When I have discussions about these kinds of things with people offline, we were talking about Facebook and how it's such a great platform. When I have a face-to-face discussion with people who seem to support more of the conservative movement, we have more of a discussion that means something. It's more of I acknowledge certain things, but I also feel like my opinion deserves to be heard. Absolutely. But when all of us are just in there, just shouting our opinions as loud as we possibly can, ignoring each other, then that's what we get. And that's what this whole thing with Kaepernick and Nike has created. And I'm not saying it's anybody's fault specifically, but the one point I will make, Ted Cruz, who I don't, I'm a citizen in the state of Texas. I don't have a whole lot of respect for the man for a couple of reasons, but
No,
the
he's
one
an
I will
idiot.
tell
I'll
you,
just say it. He's an idiot. Go ahead.
he has done nothing to stand up to the current administration in the White House to really go through some of the things that they promised him. And somebody put out a really great tweet today. So Ted Cruz came out and he said, "I'll never buy another Nike product again. They're never going to have my business." And somebody said, "Oh, well, the best way to get Ted Cruz back on your side is to make fun of the way that his wife looks and insinuate that his dad killed JFK." That's a very, very strong point, because Ted Cruz will back anything that the president says, even though that is something that he said about Ted Cruz.
Dude,
and that is something that he said.
People fall on the line. And here, let me read. I just want to go back to a few of the comments here to put in here. Okay, cool. So let's start with the lane. I live in a border state, and what gets me is that the people who are crying for a wall and are complaining about refugees are nowhere near a border. That's true. They're complaining simply because they're conditioned to oppose immigration. The immigrants don't affect them at all, yet they don't want them here simply because they are different. Yeah, and I don't say I would agree with that, because I mean, look at it. Seeking asylum. For those of you who, let's say, want a wall, look up what an asylum, what you do for it, and guess what? You literally just come to the U.S. Yes, you can get detained, not to what they're doing today, but yes, you do just cross the border. That's what you do to seek asylum. Derek, could we bring back a show like The Jeffersons or All in the Family? There were shows that spoke, joked, and showed the truth of both sides. True that. Ricky, people are overly offended. Everyone, I think people look for reason to throw a tantrum. And I think that's true. I think we are getting conditioned now. I think there's some truth to it, for sure. And then Brian, let's see, racism will unfortunately always exist in human society as long as one person is different from another. It's our culture and future humanitarian outlook that will subside this idiocracy.
I'm not buying it.
Yeah,
I'm not buying it. I respect the opinion, and I will absolutely defend anybody who says that you don't have an opportunity to share your opinion. But there are so many countries in the world that have had very similar histories that we don't know about because we're not educated that way in this country. In Europe, in France, in England, there's so many different histories of very similar things that we see when we talk about our history in the United States, and they're miles ahead of us as far as just dealing with that same level of living in the same communities, coercing into the same society. And honestly, I think that we can get there. I think that until we attack the issue at its head and not take it and again co-opt it into this back and forth political discussion. And I think Derek's point of everybody wants to throw a tantrum, that's absolutely true. People could say right now, we're just throwing tantrums, right? I could get that. But I think until people actually take the time to say, I'm not trying to throw a tantrum, I'm trying to make a difference, I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to see the other perspective, that's when actual change will happen. And we've seen it in history. It happens. It takes a long time. I believe that our country can get there. I believe we're closer now than we were, or we're further away now than we were a little bit ago, but I think we can get back to that when we make the right decisions.
Oh, we definitely can. And look, and a lot of things have remained dormant. And, as harsh as this is going to sound, there's one way that life will change that, and that's through death, right? Old generations have to die. Eventually, you and I have got to go, right? And the newer generation will come up. And so hopefully wisdom will be instilled as we move forward. But to give you an idea, Elaine said, white people need to spend a day with a black family, vice versa, embrace the diversity. Yeah. I think that's a great idea, because trust me, as someone who's mixed, I can tell you that's true. Ricky Thomas, a little bit different here. He says, completely disagree with that. Legal immigration is completely different than illegal immigration. Border state or not, I deal with hiring people and own my own business. I've had 2 that have had fake documents and have been deported. It's not right for those who are legally entering. And so I guess my thing is, I see what you're saying, Ricky, on this one. I just look at it the way, not necessarily okay, did you enter legally versus illegally? Because first and foremost, by the way, I think the majority of American people, you and myself included, and I'm getting more and more knowledge on this on a daily basis, I don't think you even fully understand what is legal and what's not legal. Because believe it or not, just crossing the border, that is actually legal when you're seeking asylum. Like, you can totally do that. Now, when you come here and you overstay your visa and you don't leave, that's a different situation, for sure. It's interesting to me, though, just to depict this point here. When people are making fake documents, let's just kind of run with this one for a second. When people are going through the hassle of making fake documents, my question would be, why do we make the fake documents in the first place? There should be something set in motion for them to go through the legal process. And by the way, I've known people that have taken a year that have aggressively have went through it, and people have taken several years to aggressively get through it. And by the way, they cannot go back to their country. I know Killian had this with his wife. She could go back to China for a bit, but people have gotten stuck because of these weird laws. So my thing with this is, I think if we change the law and make it reasonable and make it a process that people can go through and open it up, and like, for example, hey, we're going to change the laws here. If you're legal, you have X amount of time. If you show up, we will actually send you through the process and we won't deport you. I bet if you did that, people would actually show up. There's a reason why right now the whole consensus issue is being battled that the current president's trying to do.
Yeah.
And why people don't show up is because of the fear of being deported. But these aren't bad people. So I just want to be completely transparent on that one.
And just to your point, Terrence, anyone who has issue with the current process of entering this country seeking asylum or entering this country seeking citizenship, understand the fact that probably none of us would be here. Certainly, I wouldn't be here, and a lot of folks wouldn't be here. The current president wouldn't be here if the system was as complicated now as it was 100 years ago and 200 years ago. And I think that's the point that I think gets really missed a lot of times in these discussions is this is not something that's new. This is something that literally built the foundation of America, and we have made it so complicated because we walked in, we took over, and we said, okay, we're staying now, and we're going to overlook the fact that we're here the same way. We're going to overlook that. We're going to discredit anybody else who wants to come in here and get the same opportunity that we were given in favor of, what you might argue is some blatant racism.
Oh, yeah. And then, like, Ricky Thomas had a question for you, which I think would be interesting. He's like, plus, Jeremy is from Canada. Do you think you should open your borders like people think the U.S. should do?
Nobody thinks the U.S. should open their border. That's the only thing I can say to that. I've never seen anybody say with a modicum of actual knowledge of the situation that the U.S. should be a 100% complete open border. I think that's a false narrative. That's a total. That's just something that the media has sort of taken and run with in some respects, and certain politicians have taken and run with, and it questions the intelligence or the arrogance or ignorance of the people who support those same ideas. Because look, that's not a realistic solution. That's basically like saying the solution to giving to reducing the national debt. Somebody said to just give everybody more money, make more money at the Fed. That's not a real solution. Those are fake things that people create to get these controversies. And to your point, Ricky, to create the tantrums that people are now sharing. So I don't think anybody has ever said that. I certainly wouldn't support open borders. I wouldn't support any system where we were actually being very intentional in vetting the people who were coming to our borders. I would also be very careful in saying that we wouldn't accept somebody coming to our country who didn't need the help because we never were turned away when it was our turn.
I agree. And then Derek, unfortunately, Ricky Thomas, I've been a part of the process to become a citizen, and I can see why the documents are made fake. The process is not as simple as we citizens think, and that's a huge debacle. And I will say this for a second. If we just stop and analyze it for a minute, the only reason why I am here today is because I was born here. I won the birth lottery. That is it. And if you really want to get dark, we kind of forced our way, whether half of me was, half my ancestors were enslaved and the other half may have killed a whole bunch of Native Americans for us to be here. So look, it's not a pretty solution. But I guess what I would boil down is this, is nobody's thinking just open the borders. Of course not. But what we are saying is for people that are here, let's just hit the timer for a second. Okay, let's straight what we have now. Okay, if you're here, great. Let's get you in the system. Let's get you legalized. Let's move on. And for people seeking asylum, remember, there's cause and effect. Even when our own president puts, certain restrictions, and they've got trade wars, and a lot has been going on with Mexico as well. Think about it. If their economy is terrible, or if they're going through a tough time, wouldn't you and your family want to go to a place that you hear of where you could work really hard to make your way? And look, I know a lot of people, and I don't know if they're illegal or legal straight up, but I tell you this much, they work hard. People aren't just coming over here and they're not looking for a payout. They work hard. I can go to Home Depot at any given point, pick up a lot of dudes over there, come back, pay very low money, and they will work their ass off and build some things around here. So I don't think people are just coming here just looking for a free handout. I think people generally want a better life for themselves. I like Elaine's point. We're all immigrants. Brian, by the way, Jeremy, the Oilers are still horrible. Go Red Wings. I think that was a zing at you. I appreciate the little humor. And by the way, I want to throw out a little love to
Jenny
everybody.
Holland.
And hey, Ricky Thomas, I appreciate you actually putting yourself out there as well and sharing it, because
Absolutely.
even though we're likely not going to agree with everything that you're putting on here, is a point that we're talking about it, we're speaking about it, and we're all trying to educate ourselves. And so he put up next, but how do you rule out who is legitimately applying for to be for asylum? Look, first off, you just show up. And that is for the Border Patrol. And this is where I would like to have faith that they figure that out, right? Like, let them figure that out. If I see like a family trying to come through, this is their situation, whatever it is. Like, again, I don't know all the ins and outs of that. Like, let them figure it out. That we should have, like, right now, I tell you, right now, I do not trust this administration's situation, like, at all. Like, I've been paying attention to it and hearing of this crisis that we have at the border. This president, he is right to say that we should definitely protect the border for sure. I agree with that. The way he's going about it, I just can't get with it. Tony, let's see. Tony put, I absolutely agree with Derek. Wife is an immigrant and we're still going through the process, and it's by no means cheap or easy. By the way, good point there. It is extremely expensive. I heard it's just $1,000 just to get it started, which good luck with that.
My dad actually just received his U.S. citizenship from Ontario, from Canada, about 6 months ago, and it cost him thousands of dollars in the process.
And so think about it.
A lot.
If you're coming from poverty and you're trying to make it, like $1,000 right now for me is a lot of money. You hit me something $1,000. I mean, jeez. And so he said he's going through the process, by no means cheap or easy. Most reasons why don't do it, and the fact of being scared. And I'd agree with that, Tony. And by the way, Tony, I love that picture with you next to B-Rob.
I know, I just saw that. Oh, man.
No, pour one out. Brandon Robinson.
That's right.
One of my favorite, no offense to you, Jeremy, one of my favorite Texans right there. Brandon Robinson. Make it a better process. And so that's where it's at. Like, I think, in general, Ricky, we agree with you, right? Like, we definitely have to have a secure border. We just think we need to really redo the whole process. Like, this thing's outdated and it's clearly not working, so change it. Elaine, the legal ports of entry have been closed, so the only way for these poor refugees to try to come to America is across illegally. Actually, very good point right now. So, good call out. Ricky Thomas, and we're going to have to kind of move on here momentarily, but he said, should Mexicans jump the U.S. and head to Canada and just be allowed asylum no matter the background? It's such a hard line. That's what we're all dealing with. They will. I'm a contractor, but that also builds a problem of itself. Well, I tell you this, Ricky, if you're a contractor, good luck finding the rest of us dudes to come through and work there, because if you're not paying top dollar, cheap labor, I don't know.
Terrence, I'll give you a great example real quick. I replaced my fence line, the back fence line of my house today, actually. And the gentleman I hired was a local guy. He works with the community. And I paid him. He said he was sending out a team of people to replace my entire fence. He sent out one guy. He came out, of course, he had Hispanic descent. One guy came out and replaced my entire fence in 4 hours by himself. He made $350 for that job. I wouldn't do that job. I wouldn't do that job for $500. I couldn't do that job in that time. Your point is absolutely valid. These are not people taking jobs that hardworking Americans are chomping at the bit to get. That to me, that's a pretty solid point.
And by the way, last one here, we'll have to get moving. Elaine put it, even women married to American servicemen have to go through this long, drawn-out process of citizenship. What do you expect from refugees with no money? Nothing. By the way, just quick little, today I was reading the news. Not only do we have the consensus issue that they're trying to do for the whole gerrymandering situation, which, again, another topic. They even talked about trying, after the 4th of July, really getting aggressive with it. And even for servicemen and women, if your family's here illegally and hasn't gone through the process, rounding up the whole family. So this will be really, I don't want to say interesting in a positive way because it's not. I just think this is just ridiculous.
Polarizing.
Yeah,
Yep.
and flat out ridiculous. Okay, so with that, we're going to switch topics here just for a little bit because we know like we're already approaching an hour here, and I know Jeremy and I can talk forever and ever and ever. But it brings me back to my third topic, and it kind of fits in a little bit, but it's about free speech online. So what we're really talking about is when we look at Facebook, a lot of people are getting upset, and a lot of this goes towards conservatives. Hey, own it. Where they feel like the platform should be open. And so first I'll post it up for the comments reaction. Just curious, do you think free speech is open online to Facebook? And as you put that down, I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to say no. Like if you come in my house, right, or if I come in your house, and if I'm saying something that really upsets you, you can ask me to leave. And if you look at really what free speech was for, it was so that you can say what you want. Because think about, again, you got to go back in the times that it was written. If you said something negative about the king or queen, that could be death. That could be it, right? And so we have it in a public, like public square where you can voice your opinions and nobody's going to come at you and arrest you and this sort of thing. But it doesn't mean that you can just go online and say whatever you want and that's okay. No, there's terms and conditions, there's rules. It's just like a club, right? I mean, I could turn around and, go to a nightclub and they can tell me I can't wear Nike shoes, no pun intended for the previous topic, and I'm not allowed in. Or if I go in, let's say, a school, it's not okay to drop the F-bomb somewhere. So no, you have to understand that free speech does not mean you can go online on platforms like Facebook and say what you want without repercussions and possibly getting booted off.
Yeah, and again, I'll use the same example with a different flavor to it. If you go into a Wendy's and you stand up and you say, "Hey, everybody here who's not black, let's beat up this black guy," you will not be allowed back in that Wendy's, and you're probably going to be arrested for a hate crime. So why there are white supremacists, proud white supremacists on Facebook saying that their opinion is something that needs to be allowed to be put out onto the web and that it can't be censored, I totally miss that. That misses me by a mile. You can't just go out and say anything you want in a public space that's owned by, everybody. And the internet is one of those spaces. I think it's sort of lost on a lot of people that, because of the keyboard warrior aspect, but there's still consequences to what you say. And there's still consequences to the people who allow you to say them in a lot of ways. It's that accountability thing. Facebook has to take accountability for the fact that if somebody gets hurt because there's a group of people celebrating white supremacy on Facebook, it's partly on them for allowing that to happen.
Yeah. No, I'm with you 100% with that. It's like, look, it's just a simple cause and effect. If you say something, right, no matter what it is that you say, guess what? There's always repercussions. It can be positive. They don't necessarily have to be negative, but they also can be negative. Just like, when I'm in my house, right, and like, who was that? It's like, there was like that, maybe he owned one of the NBA teams, right? And
Clippers, yeah.
You know who I'm talking about. And like his, girlfriend or wife or whatever, like secretly recorded him. Okay, like something in your house that you do, right? Like
Donald Sterling.
You can say, thank you for that. You can say whatever you want in your house. That's totally up to you. Like you can be whoever you want to be. That's cool. But when you go out to a public place, look, I hate to tell you, but that's just not cool. I mean, no. You can't walk around it just blatantly anywhere. Like if I go to church and I start talking about, let's say, not even anything that would be, well, this is not a very good example, but if I were to go, let me just reverse it for a second because that's not going to make any sense. Like if I were to go to, again, I'll just keep it at a school and I talk about, things that are not school related or whatnot, or even if I go in and I talk about how I don't like anybody, I want to shoot somebody up or whatever it may be, like that's going to get you possibly arrested. You may not have meant it or whatever it may be, but look, your words have, there's this course of action that can be taken upon you. And I just don't think that when it comes to social media, it is not a free for all. Again, if you say it, it could be flagged, it could be taken down. Facebook, Twitter, all of them have their terms and conditions. And just to kind of give you like a counterpoint that somebody may try is, okay, look what happened with President Trump with Twitter. So people said, oh, well, he can say whatever he wants to say. And then it definitely got dicey when he started blocking people. Mm-hmm. And a judge said, wait a minute, you can't block people as a president of the United States if you're using this as a platform to spread your message, right? Which is a whole different situation. And so I'm going to read a couple things here. So I'm going to go, Derek, YouTube will censor a video due to the copyright, but none of them, social media platforms, hold anyone accountable nor stop broadcasts of a hate crime, high school beating, etc., that's live or not. And so that may be a bit dicey, but I see what you're saying with that. That is definitely very interesting. And then Larry Van here said, life has been made a double-edged sword. If you can be exploited, you have no rights. If you speak up about the unfairness, you're blacklisted. The less fortunate seem to take the brunt end of it, and the people that are guilty of the mistreatment are ignored. The cycle keeps going round and round. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. The people who want to, let's say, censor the most are usually those in power, versus the opposite of that. So I believe I see your point there, Dad. What you mean? It's so weird. I can't call him Larry. I just gotta call him Dad. That's just never gonna be kosher with me. But yeah, I don't think online. There's just a lot of people that hardcore believe that the internet is just a free for all, and I just don't think that's the case. I just don't buy it.
It's not. And that's the bottom line. I can't remember who made the point. I think it was Derek. That's a really good point that he made about copyright, because they are very quick to jump when it affects their bottom line. Mm-hmm. And I think it comes back to our original point we made this at the beginning of the show, where we talked about accountability. YouTube is one of the most probably criminal when it comes to looking for a reason to demonetize a video for a content creator, as opposed to looking for a reason to defend somebody's rights or look out for somebody as a person. One example that Derek, maybe this is what you're kind of alluding to, and this goes on both sides. Of course, conservatives, this is sort of the more polarizing topic with conservatives, because they are the ones that are fighting for their ability to say things that are controversial. But there's a group that some people would associate with the liberal side. I wouldn't, but Antifa, anti-fascist movement, posted a video, and there was some videos posted over the weekend of the journalist Andy Ngo, and it may be pronounced Ngo. I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but he was walking through a crowd of anti-fascist protesters, and he was getting beaten, and he was getting they were throwing milkshakes full of cement at this reporter. Jesus. And it was a horrible, horrible scene. This video stayed on the internet, and it's still on the internet today. And some people would say that's defending Antifa and defending their right to beat up people. And I tend to agree with that. I don't think that should be on the internet. I think that those things, and if they are on the internet, I think they should be subject to the same guidelines as if there was a group of people beating somebody up because of the color of their skin. You could look at the purpose of the narrative behind why, but really you got to look at just what it is at its face. And people start to question that, and they say, well, why is Antifa allowed to show beating up a reporter, but we're not allowed to show demonstrating against something we feel is our belief as a white Christian American, right? It's a fine line in some people's mind. In my mind, it should be no line. It should be very black and white. It should be, this is not acceptable for the internet, so it shouldn't be on the internet. And if it is on the internet, it should be on a space of the internet that's designated for this specifically.
There you go. I think that's not to sorry to interrupt,
Yeah,
but
no, for
you
sure.
you hit it right there. Look, Facebook is not that platform. YouTube is not that platform. If somebody wants to make www.imaracist.com and that's where you want to go, then that's on you, right? If that's where you want to participate, more power to you. That's so weird to say, but
And
yeah,
and
don't
if
do the
you want
fist
to
when you.
go to that website, and then you also want to inspire specific hatred, and you want to start posting people's addresses, you should be censored. You should be taken down for that. Yes,
Or
there should be a space that exists for you to do what you want to do, but within reason. This is still a public space.
Well, I think we got to get the word accountability back in here. It's
Yes.
like, look,
Yes.
if people start, let's say, this movement, and then all of a sudden the movement becomes violent, to me, I look at it like, okay, wait, who was responsible for that? And if there was people who were inspiring people to be hateful, and because think of it this way, right? We as Americans, I think we could almost all agree when it comes to, let's say, ISIS or somebody doing some terroristic stuff, we want that content pulled, right? Like, do not
Yep.
try to get people to come kill Americans because no, we're very good people, right? We love people, we don't hate you. Like, we're not about those things that they may be reading about and getting that misinformation. So we're totally cool with that content being taken down. But then it's hard for us to see if I'm spewing very racist propaganda. It's hard sometimes for the individual to be like, oh, but I'm different. I'm different. I'm not the same as them. And it's like, well, not necessarily. If you're invoking violence or you're insinuating that, to me, is no different than that.
Yeah,
So
and people will say it's a slippery line or whatever. I don't care. Honestly. That is so not the issue here that more stuff gets censored, because to be honest, I think that's probably where it should go. I think more stuff should be censored.
well,
I
look,
think more content needs to be really filtered through that eyes through the lens of, is this creating a solution? Is this helping to exacerbate the problem, or is this actually just something that's somebody wants to look at? Until we actually look at it through a filter that makes sense, and not one that's just we demand to be able to say everything we want to say and share everything we want to share, and any hindrance on that is an attack on our First Amendment rights. I think that's the slippery slope we need to be concerned about.
yeah, absolutely. And again, I think you hit it where when things are private, because if you were to look at it, then people can go around, and people still today, if you want to get in your own little group and you want to say whatever you can or whatever you want to, you're absolutely more than welcome. However, if you spark violence or something happens, it's just in my viewpoint, people have to be held accountable for that. And
Absolutely.
it doesn't matter what group they are, right? And it's easy for us, again, we condemn groups that we believe are the enemy, or like, from like an American standpoint. But yet we don't see some of our own internal issues that we have, as a country, and things that we're, raising. And so, like, I'll give you like one final example here, and I know this is going to be a touchy one for some people, but like, when I heard our president at one point say about Hillary, and he's like, I don't know if anyone can stop her. Maybe the people with the Second Amendment can stop her,
Oh
right?
yeah.
It's almost like, wait a minute, are you trying to hint at people, like, for people with guns to maybe do something? But like, no, you don't do that. You don't. And so, anyways, like, dude just says so many dumb things like that. But that's where you can. And again, I'm not trying to link any specific thing to another. I just want to call this out because we have to get much more granular and much more specific if I want to make that bridge. But when you notice Charlottesville,
Yeah.
people just seem to come out of the woodwork, which I don't agree, right? I think a lot of people had it dormant in them, but right now we're so vocal and people feel so empowered to kind of spew out that hatred that,
It's terrifying.
yeah,
It's honestly terrifying.
and
Yeah.
now people are doing it. You see people, just and I mean, and all across so many different places, right? Whether it's things like Charlottesville, the church that got shot up in South Carolina, which by the way wasn't originally called a terrorist, which I thought was interesting. And then, and even from something totally different, but when you have like the transgender community, right? You have a lot of people, dying
Yeah.
from that, right? And it's like, wait, like, what are we doing? So, America, we need to get our poo emoji together, straight up. We need to chill,
I think that's the best point we
get
can make. Yeah.
it together, all of us. Jeez, where are we going? But anyway, so Jeremy, I know right now we're a bit over an hour. We're approaching about an hour and 10 minutes. I know you're working on a very heavy project, but I will say this: I would definitely love to do this again if you're down.
I'm
That's for
always down
sure.
for a podcasting, and I thank you for taking a break from Stranger Things season 3 to let me come in
Yes.
and talk for a bit. I know you're very excited, so I'll let you get back to it.
Well, that's going to be tomorrow. Oh, well, when does it? It's technically July 4th, right? What time?
Don't
Is it
start it.
midnight?
Don't start it
Is it
tonight.
midnight?
No,
Am I gonna?
I think it came out at 4 o'clock this afternoon. I think it's good.
Oh, really? 4 o'clock this afternoon?
I think that's what Netflix was saying on Twitter. But you know what? If there's an episode on there, Terrence, don't start it tonight because you will never stop.
You're right.
It's that show where it'll get you to the next one. You'll say, "Oh man, what happened next?" And then it's 4 a.m. and you're like, "What happened here?"
Oh my
So
goodness! Like I am, like you guys, you do not understand. Like I suck at moderation. Like I will get started on that, and I will not stop. Um, for me, it's like back to back. And by the way, like I love anything that's truly '80s themed or whatnot. They did such a good job. That's all I can say. Stranger
it's a
Things. I'm
great
looking
show.
forward to
It's a
it.
great show.
So good. If you haven't seen it, not only will I ask where have you been under a rock, but you definitely need to do it. And so, Derek, did I miss that? Maybe you did. Tony, really great stuff, gents. Keep it going. Thank you. I appreciate you participating as well as long as you, Joseph. So we appreciate it. Thank you, Dad, as always. But yeah, Jeremy, we should do one of these. Honestly, I can even do one tomorrow if you got some time. Just throw it out there. I'd do it.
Just hit me up. I'm always down, man.
All right, brother. All right, everyone. Have a good night.